Well, here it is, the classic early American jet fighter, the North American F-86 Sabre. Almost 6,000 of these aircraft were produced, not just in the United States, but also by Canadair, which are said to have produced the best Sabres ever made. This aircraft was capable of climbing to 50,000 feet, getting up towards almost 700 miles an hour, and was supersonic in a dive. It really took on the MiG-15, and with superior pilot training, it gained the upper hand in Korea. And in fact, the wing from this aircraft has a lot of aerodynamics gleaned from the German research which was captured at the end of the Second World War. In this shot, we're looking at the starboard wing of the F-86 Sabre, and we can see the extended leading edge device, which is in fact a slat. A slat is a device which actually forms a slot between the device itself and the wing, which accelerates and re-energizes the airflow over the wing. In the quest for improved performance, there are many variations of Sabre wings were made. They actually had the slats, as we see here. Some had the slats bolted, locked in. Others actually had an extended leading edge called the 6-3 wing fitted, which was retrofitted to all RAF Sabres back in 1953. But the result was a combination of better turning performance. However, the hard wing, or the 6-3 wing, which deleted the slat, had actually slightly higher approach speeds. But this aircraft's a fighter, and it was optimized for high altitude turning performance and of course for speed. When the Sabre was in service in Korea, in fact it was still using the same armament as the fighters at the end of the Second World War. Here we have the Sabre with 6 50 caliber machine guns, 3 on either side. Very effective at relatively short range, but later versions of the Sabre actually had missiles. But during Korea, missiles were not an option. It was gunfighting at close range. There are several Sabres, in fact quite a number of Sabres still flying, and I've spoken to one pilot who flies a Sabre at the Tamora Aviation Museum, and he describes it as an absolute delight to fly. Not many people realise that the Royal Air Force actually had 485 86 Sabres supplied under Lend-Lease arrangements when it was found that the Meteor was really outdated and the Hunter had not arrived in service. All but 2 squadrons of these aircraft were in Germany, with 19 and 92 Squadron looking after air defence in the United Kingdom. The engine in the Sabre is also a centrifugal flow engine, but in fact the Royal Australian Air Force was equipped with the Avon Sabre, which had a large Rolls-Royce Avon installed for improved performance, because that engine offered almost 10,000 pounds of thrust, as against the almost 6,000 pounds of the engine fitted to this Sabre. I always thought the Sabre was an exceptionally attractive looking aeroplane, and it does make an extremely good model. In fact, I fly one myself. It offers superb handling, it is actually very docile, and with the huge range of colour schemes, mine's in Royal Air Force camouflage, it offers a possibility of a colour scheme to suit your requirements, whether it's in natural metal or in painted camouflage. The choice is yours. Well, we've seen the MiG-15, we've seen the F-86 Sabre, and those aircraft were developed really to about as fast as they could be made to go, with centrifugal compressors and non-afterburning engines. Their limiting speed was around 0.9 and occasionally up to the speed of sound, or Mach 1, in a shallow dive. There was always the need in a fighter for more and more speed, higher rates of climb, both to catch enemy bombers and in combat with enemy fighters. So the United States involved themselves in the development of the second generation of fighters, the Century Series fighters. This started off with the F-100 Super Sabre, and although it's called a Super Sabre, has very little in common with the actual F-86 Sabre. This aircraft was capable of around 860 miles an hour, so the tropopause, that was around Mach 1.2. What made these extra high speeds possible? And that was the afterburner. We explained earlier on when looking at the engine that some of the exhaust gas still has oxygen present. So it was found that by injecting fuel into the tailpipe and igniting it, the gas was accelerated to much higher speeds. I'll give you an example. In a conventional aeroplane, the exhaust gas may be only travelling at 700-800 miles per hour or even less. But you cannot push an aircraft past that speed of 800 miles an hour unless the exhaust velocity is yet higher. So the idea in an afterburner is to add fuel to the exhaust gas, which still creates oxygen, and burn it and accelerate the exhaust gas to a much higher speed. This has a slight complication in that to obtain these very high velocities without actually choking the exhaust pipe and the engine itself, you need a variable nozzle, and we can see that variable nozzle on the rear of the F-100 Super Sabre here. At the moment it's in the closed position, but when the afterburner lights, those petals would actually open to manage the exhaust velocity. The result of that for the Super Sabre, which didn't have a hugely powerful engine, was that its maximum speed was around 850 miles an hour. So that would be the equivalent of about Mach 1.2. You can also see on the Sabre the quite thin wing, and of course the key to very high speed flight as well as high power and an afterburner is the swept wing. No swept wings in the early stages, you would just simply not get the very high speeds we're looking for. Later technology in one of the Century Series fighters, the F-104, allowed you to use a very thin wing to achieve that high speed. But in the early stages of very high speed flight, swept wings were the key. On this F-100 Sabre, we can also see another of the developments for high-speed flight is the all-moving tailplane. I explained earlier on that when you get shock waves forming on control surfaces, you can in fact get very disturbed airflow and it can cause serious control difficulties. When they were trying to push aircraft through the sound barrier, they found that the effectiveness of the elevator could be seriously reduced. So it was decided and tried to fit a whole moving tailplane to manage the pitch control of these very, very fast aeroplanes. So no longer do we have a separate elevator, the whole tailplane moves to give the up or down loads needed to maneuver the aircraft or keep it in the required trimmed flight. So far as a radio control model is concerned, the Super Sabre is eminently suitable. In fact, we have actually had at least one victory in the World Jet Masters with a F-100 from a BVM kit, but there were several manufacturers actually producing the Super Sabre. It has a big wing, a relatively big wing, which is always a good thing for a model aeroplane, all-moving tailplane, good control maneuverability, and there's plenty of fuel capacity available inside the rather capacious fuselage. In addition, the F-100 was built in large numbers and supplied to many air forces around the world. So once again, you have a wide selection of colour schemes to suit your precise tastes and requirements. But a great flying model aeroplane, and in fact the BVM-1 and both the aviation design aircraft, which are of similar size, have been very, very successful in competitions around the world.